Okay, we're going to get started now. First speaker is Mathew Lowe, speaking from Finwhale to Finishing, the redevelopment of UMZC.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for letting me talk about one of my favourite specimens in the entire museum. I am Matt Lowe, and I am the collections manager for the University Museum of Zoology in Cambridge, the old Cambridge, before anybody thinks we're from Harvard. And this is the highlight of the Zoology Museum, I think. So if anybody wants to learn more about this specimen, I am currently actively tweeting on Migratory Matt, so you can follow me on Twitter, where there should be lots of videos and photographs of the time-lapse of the takedown and reinstallation of this iconic specimen. So the museum itself is part of the Department of Zoology, and it's one of 8 university museums in Cambridge. We research, we teach, we have 2 million specimens. And for those of you who are coming to Edinburgh next year, I highly recommend a trip to Cambridge to come and visit us. It is a fantastic museum. We have specimens collected by Charles Darwin throughout his life. We have dodos, we have Tasmanian tigers. I could go on, but I need to talk about one specimen, albeit the biggest. So 1865 was a keynote year for the Museum of Zoology. It represented the birth of the museum. Our collections are actually around 200 years old plus, collected from all over the world. But in 1865, they all coalesced into one building, and it also represented the death of our Finwhale. The 13th of November, on the coast of Pevensey, the local lighthouse keeper, Pevensey is just down the road from Hastings. You may have heard that in medieval history lessons on the south coast of the UK. But the local lighthouse keeper on the Pevensey coast noticed a boat in trouble. It was a particularly violent storm, and it turned out not to be a boat. The following morning, this was the sight, if you look at the picture from 1865, that greeted locals in Pevensey. And for the keen-eyed amongst you who can see the top hats, etc., the particular Victorian-style dress, that's exactly what we'll be wearing after Brexit. So yeah, you can all look forward to that. But it proved exceedingly popular. Some enterprising local fishermen paid £38 from the local authorities to purchase the whale. They erected hoardings around it, and around 40,000 people over the next 3 months visited the whale. It must have got pretty stinky by the end of that 3 months. They had to pay 6 pence each to come and see it. So many people came to see it, there was a railway line that ran nearby. They actually built a railway halt just next to the whale skeleton. So you could say it was the first whaleway station. It's great if I get a groan. Eventually the whale was deflensed by the local butchers, and it was moved to Hastings Cricket Ground, where it was exhibited for another few months. But it came to the attention of the University of Museum of Zoology, who purchased it in 1866. The next photograph along is taken in 1894, just before the baleen was actually installed, and the baleen in later photographs is actually from another whale. But we won't talk too much about that. But that's the old Victoria Museum. It took them 30 years to figure out how to put the whale together, how to mount it safely, but they did a fantastic job because it remained there until the 1960s. So the Museum of Zoology at the time proved very popular, but it wasn't so popular with the famous physicist Ernest Rutherford, who complained that the museum took up too much space, and also stated, "I don't know why they need that bloody great fish," which demonstrates quite nicely why we do need that bloody great fish. So it remained in place till the 1960s, but was then removed and stored. It took a while for them to figure out how to remount the whale in the new Arup building, as it was then called. And that's a photograph taken in 2013 of it installed outside. Great for viewing purposes, not so good for the whale itself. It was absolutely covered in pigeon mess. But in 2013, we had to take the whale apart. It took 3 months in total. Here is we took it apart bone by bone, and my colleagues Nigel Larkin and Phil Rye were employed to help move it. It was craned off the side of the building. The skull, which weighed 1.5 tons, was actually kept in a shed for 2 years while we worked on a major redevelopment of the museum that involved the packing and moving of 2 million specimens and the redisplay of our entire galleries. And if my colleague Nat can wave, she was heavily involved in the redisplay of that museum. So we cleaned an inch of poo off all of the vertebrae. I went through so many toothbrushes. But eventually, in 2016, we rebuilt the whale. Took 6 weeks, but we reused the old Victorian metalwork. It was so good and so bespoke to that whale, it just made perfect sense. And we reopened in June 2018, and since then, 150,000 people have walked underneath that whale and welcomed everybody. And I think that's my time up. Thank you.